with the formal good evening welcome. And I am Eli Cooper, the city's transportation program manager. This is the first meeting of the Vision Zero Implementation Committee. Appreciate all of you for joining us. And this is going to be an exciting and action-packed committee. Over the past year or two, a little more than that, we were going through the process of creating a plan. This process is different. The plan exists, and we're moving forward with implementation strategies. And it's going to really start in earnest tonight. We do want to hit the ground running, and there will be a presentation of some ideas that we would hope to install this spring, so within a couple of months. So your involvement is really appreciated, and your feedback is necessary. Next slide, please. So our agenda tonight will include an overview of the Vision Zero plan, quick introduction to implementation, and then we're going to get into the quick build, which is those pieces that we'd like to put in place this spring. Conclusion will be next steps, and then as a duly noted public meeting, we will have public input at the end. The thing to know about, if you're not a panelist, the video speaking and other features are limited to the committee. For others, we will have time for questions, and you'll be able to use the Q&A function in order to participate. Next slide, please. In order to introduce you to the Zoom platform, if you're not familiar with it, the question and answer button that I just made reference to, you'll see on the screen is in the lower central part. It's circled or boxed in a red rectangle. And if you look all the way to the bottom of your own computer monitor, you'll see the Q&A dialogue icon. That would be where you can enter questions for the committee. We'll be monitoring that during the meeting. There is also a requirement that you hit the send. There's a blue button that will pop up after you enter your comment or question. Please make sure you hit send, otherwise only you will know what you typed. For folks, we don't have any right now, so I think I'm just going to bypass the phone instructions, and if people do call in, I'll cover that at that time. Next slide, please. Meeting norms. I think this is something that we're all familiar at this point. Let's behave as the slide suggests. My reminder again is the Q&A is going to be the way for us to engage in conversation during the meeting, except if it's during a period when we stop and actually ask for committee comments. The comment features are also available for folks who are on the phone. The other norm that I wanted to cover is, if you are on the phone or even if you're on a computer, please make sure that you're in a quiet area and be thoughtful of others. We're trying to have an engaging conversation. Next slide. So the follow-up thoughts is that we have put ourselves on notice now, because we're putting it in writing and giving it to you, that meeting summaries will be posted within 7 to 10 days. We expect to have the summary on the website by March the 1st. We would also be placing a video. So this meeting is being recorded, and we will have that available for the members who couldn't make it so they could see the presentation. We will consider all of your input as we move forward through this process. I want to thank you again for agreeing to be with us and joining us this evening. And at this point, I'm going to say thank you again and turn it to Stacey.
Thanks, Eli. As Eli went through this at the top of the agenda, I just want to reiterate what we're going to go over tonight. I also want to just say first off that I'm really excited to be continuing to work here in Ann Arbor and helping to see this plan that we finished about a year ago or so get implemented. So we're going to do some introductions. We will introduce our team, and we will ask you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. We did promote everybody on the subcommittee to a panelist so that we can more easily have the same kind of conversations that we might have if we were in a room. But for now, to save time, and since you all, a lot of you probably know each other, we'll just use the chat to first introduce yourself and any organization that you're representing. We're going to go over a very brief overview of moving together, the plan that led to this implementation work. And then we're going to go over what our work is through our contract and talk for the bulk of the hour and a half about the first steps that we're going to do, the first action steps, which will include quick build projects that should be installed this spring and early summer. And then we'll go over our next steps for the process and open up to public comment at the end. So Eli, do you want to have your staff introduce themselves first? You're muted. Oh, can't unmute yourself.
I'll tell you what, while Eli works through that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So good evening, everyone. My name is Raymond Hess. I'm the transportation manager at the city. And then maybe let me go ahead and turn it over to Cynthia.
Thank you, Raymond.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cynthia Redinger. I am one of the city's transportation engineers, and I look forward to working with you on this project.
And I just jumped in and started talking without introducing myself. I'm Stacey Meekins. I'm a principal with Sam Schwartz, and we led the Moving Together plan, and I'm the project manager for this effort moving forward. And I will pass it to Franny Ritchie.
Hi, my name is Franny. I work under Stacey at Sam Schwartz, and I'm excited to be here.
Janet?
Hello, everyone. My name is Janet Atarian. I'm a principal at Smith Group and our senior mobility strategist, and also someone who grew up in Ann Arbor. So delighted to be here today. Thanks. Oliver, do you want to go?
Sounds good. I'm Oliver Kiley, landscape architect, also with Smith Group. I've also grown up in Ann Arbor and been fortunate to work out of our Ann Arbor office. So good to see all of you tonight. Carolyn?
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn Lush. I am a planner at Smith Group in the Ann Arbor office.
All right. Just checking that I'm unmuted. So that's our project team, some of the city staff that's working with us, although we have a bigger team behind Eli and Raymond and Cynthia working with us as well. And likewise on the consultant side, have a bigger team behind us. So you'll probably see some other faces throughout this process. So maybe just a quick show of hands if you all are familiar with moving together. Right, great. I expected that was the case, so I don't have a depth of slides here to go over. I think that you all are very familiar with it, but I didn't want to assume that everybody knew what we were working from. So just to kick us off, obviously the city's goal is to work towards 0 deaths as well as 0 emissions. And those goals are working in tandem. Vision Zero itself is a commitment to eliminating death and serious injury from traffic crashes. And it's also about the approach. And so we're going to be talking about solutions. We're also going to be working with the city to talk about to understand how project development happens and how we can streamline things so that these safety measures are systematized. The whole plan included 76 strategies, and 22 of those we called key strategies. And we demonstrate in the plan how each of those strategies relates to the values that came out of the process through public engagement and stakeholder engagement. It's not all about engineering solutions, so we will start talking about education and encouragement, enforcement strategies, evaluation, and of course, equity. We're looking at cross-agency and cross-departmental collaboration. So probably in some future meetings, we will also be talking about what your role is in helping the city get to Vision Zero. But this is an action plan. So here in our work, we're going to be really focused on those short-term strategies that were identified in the plan. So one of the first things that we did in starting to work with the city on the action and implementation plan in December was to look at the crashes again. What has happened since the last data set that we looked at in the Moving Together plan. And so actually what we saw is a slight decrease. In 2019 was, roughly on par with the average, and 2020 saw a decrease. And maybe that could be explained by COVID, but what we're seeing in other communities is actually that went up. So it's a really encouraging sign that crashes were down in 2020 in Ann Arbor. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of our process here in the action plan and implementation plan. Obviously, we've invited you all here to be part of this to help guide this process as the Vision Zero Implementation Committee, as a subcommittee to the Transportation Commission. So as a member of the Implementation Committee, we are asking that you help us identify project prioritization criteria so that we can sift through the different opportunities in Ann Arbor and understand what are the highest opportunities. Sorry, I'm just going to pause here and promote Sid. Sid is on our team at Sam Schwartz. So I'm catching some of the chat as I'm talking, but probably not all of it. So if anybody on my team wants to jump in, if I'm missing anything, feel free. So sorry, back to committee roles. We are going to be asking you to help guide us on the implementation timeline. Guide us through, make sure that we are approaching engagement in an equitable and effective and comprehensive manner. And moving forward, we believe this committee may outlast this plan and help the city staff continue this work moving forward. And one of the roles that I see is that the committee would help the city and staff adjust to new challenges that we didn't foresee or new opportunities. And how do we adjust that plan so that we're not just rigid in what we said we would do this year. If something new comes along next year, there's a great opportunity. You guys can help the city adjust to that. We did identify a chair and vice chair for this committee, with everybody else serving as members at large. So Julie Boland has agreed to be chair. Julie, do you want to say any words? Not to put you on the spot.
Hi, I'm Julie Boland. I've been a member of the Transportation Commission for, I think, about 4 years now, and I'm happy to play this role on this committee.
Thanks. Let me get some applause. And Brett Hanamaki as vice chair, did you want to say anything?
I am very happy to be here. I'm much more happy to see this awesome plan that we've all been excited about begin to be implemented. So this is great. Looking forward to it. And like Julie, I'm on the Transportation Commission. I've been on there for around 2 years.
Great. Thank you. So an overview of our project scope. We'll be coming up with a communication strategy and, excuse me, usually have that on mute, and executing that. And Smith Group will be leading that effort. And so you'll be hearing from Oliver about our initial strategy. We are looking at projects that can be implemented in 2022, as I mentioned earlier. So some quick build projects. So that's one of the first things that we've been working on. And one of our next steps is that next bullet to develop conceptual designs and do engagement around those quick build strategies. And then we'll be building out a 5-year implementation program and action plan. So those bullets kind of go together. But then another piece of this is a major streets traffic calming toolbox. And that might overlap a little bit with the action plan, in that an action plan might include some of the tools that are in that toolbox, but that will also be a standalone piece that the city can use moving forward to complement the local streets traffic calming toolbox. So we've introduced some of the city staff that are working on this and some of the consultant team. Along with Sam Schwartz and Smith Group, we have AECOM on our team, who was also part of moving together, and they're primarily going to be leading the major streets traffic calming toolbox. And this is how those tasks line up in a timeline. Preliminarily, we are looking at completing this work this summer. So we'll have a lot to do in that time, and we anticipate meeting with you all 5 times throughout this process. We have a 6th meeting as a potential if needed. And obviously this first meeting here in late February is shown here, and then probably meeting again mid-April. And then another one following on about 2 months later in early June, and then the more frequent through the summer as we are aligning with some project milestones. So now I'm going to pass it to Oliver to talk about our engagement strategy.
Great, thanks, Stacey. So as you saw in the timeline, there's, obviously a major component of this is getting some quick build projects out in the street and get those implemented this spring. And we'll spend the bulk of the rest of the time after this talking through some initial proposals and ideas for what those look like. But as part of rolling that out, we do have some engagement work that we would like to do. Overall for this effort, there's a few major components to the engagement strategy. One is really a number of kind of housekeeping and communication items that we just wanted to make all of you aware of. So what was the transportation master plan, the moving together page on the city's website, that'll be updated over time and throughout this process with kind of current content about where the state of the plan is. That'll serve as a place where we can notify people about engagement opportunities that are coming up over the next couple of months. We'll be using some additional web-based tools. You may have seen some of them, like the Healthy Streets survey that was done a couple years ago. There'll be other tools like that that we'll use during this process to help solicit some public input as well. But really, over the next couple of months, the focus of the engagement is really around those quick build projects. What we're anticipating for that is in April, and we have some tentative dates we're looking at for that, but we'll be following up as that gets nailed down more specifically. But doing a workshop in April, a virtual workshop, that'll be an opportunity for us to share kind of the draft design, draft ideas for those quick build projects and solicit input from participants on those as we help refine them and just make sure we understand what concerns or ideas or suggestions people have for those projects. Following that workshop in April, there'll be a series of site walks that we're planning, so we can actually go out with our design team to those different locations where the quick build projects are being proposed, and we can make our team available to meet people on site, meet residents, meet other interested parties to talk about what's being proposed and share the design plans in a bit more detail that way. As I mentioned, throughout this process, there'll be an opportunity for some surveying. And then lastly, as Stacey was talking about the major streets traffic calming, some of the later workshops that are planned during this process will help focus in a little bit more on specific topics within that. So more details will come out as we get closer to that date. Next slide. And one of the things that's important as part of this whole effort, and for those of you who are involved with the transportation master plan process, the points that are up here probably don't come as any surprise. They're things that you may have heard in the community or things that have come up. But we think with the Vision Zero program, we know that the messaging around this is really critical and really important to explain to people. It's not about trying to inconvenience people and make their lives more difficult. It's really about creating a safer environment for everybody, regardless of how you move through the city. And that applies to both people driving vehicles as well as walking and biking. So these are a few messages, as we start to go out to the community more and talk about these projects from an implementation standpoint. We want to make sure that these messages are being communicated to the public and that they're understood by people. So, that Vision Zero is about reducing traffic deaths and serious injury, and that these can be prevented through physical design, that slower speeds are safer for everyone, that idea that, everybody deserves to be able to get home safely at the end of the day, and that safe roads really need to serve a variety of users regardless of how they're moving through the area. And, I think part of the conversation too is just being honest and upfront with the community about what that means. This will mean physical changes in the road, and we have to be honest about what those changes will mean and what may result from them, and be upfront with acknowledging people's concerns and being able to respond to those. So just wanted to share that from a messaging standpoint. We think these are some key things to be keeping in mind. And then last slide on engagement. Again, this was just a bit more detail in terms of the quick build projects. Once we get these locations confirmed, and we'll talk through those with you today, our team will need to be moving pretty quickly to start getting the word out around these. We really want to make sure that people are aware that these are coming and that they have an opportunity to provide feedback in a few different ways. So some of the general kind of citywide messaging systems that can be used for communication, we'll be using those, but then also to have some more targeted notification and messaging around the quick build project locations. So that could be things like putting up yard signs, doing direct mailers, things like that to nearby residents and businesses so that they're aware of what's coming through. So I think I'll pause there before we shift. Stacey, I think we were going to ask some questions here, or at least pause and see if there were any questions from the committee members about any of the engagement process. So
questions or reactions before we move on?
Sure. Is this only looking at streets or trails too?
Yeah. Go ahead, Stacey.
Yeah, we're focused where we found the high crashes.
Oh, okay, but where trails parallel streets, they might affect safety. For example, on the Fuller corridor, there's a lot of bike crashes, and trails interact with that in terms of safety.
Yeah, that's true.
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
Yeah, and I think, Larry, when you see one of the quick build sites, you'll notice one of the improvements that's on that corridor.
This might be coming later, but is there a scope of capability for how many, or is there a budget constraints or anything for the quick build?
Yeah,
Well, I think that I'll jump in here. You know, we would all have liked to have an unlimited budget, but yes, there are budget constraints. Quick build strategies by their definition are low cost. So we do have a number to run through here, and depending, because this is going to be our first foray into quick build as part of a construction type project. And if they go well, we would likely have more resources available to deploy more for next year. But at this point, the city council has authorized a budget amount, and we're intending to expend that amount in this year's program.
all right, any other questions or thoughts? So with that, we wanted to get into
Stacey,
yeah.
just before, and I was giving, if anyone else had that thought, we did have our newest team member join, and I'd like to allow Suzanne a chance to do a self-introduction. Suzanne, you're on the spot.
All right, good evening. Can you all hear me? I'm not sure. I've been having some audio issues.
We can hear you.
Okay, well, my sincerest apologies for being tardy. I am very happy to be joining the team with the City of Ann Arbor and look forward to working with all of you in the very current future. Thank you, Eli.
Take it away, Stacey.
Welcome, Suzanne. All right, so we wanted to get into what we've been talking about with the city for the last 2 months. We've been looking at going back through the analysis that we did with moving together and trying to focus on what we can do in the immediate term, we like to say, not even the short term. So this slide might look familiar. This is a page out of the Moving Together plan, an overview of some things that can be done as quick builds. So quick build basically means that you're using readily available materials, which is often paint or some version of pavement coloring, pavement markings, and bollards or posts, sometimes even being a little bit more creative and just using things that you might have in your garage, you know, drums that you can plant flowers in, things like that. We might not be getting that creative. We're going to go with the more traditional paint and bollard kind of strategy here. But things that we can do with those are some bump outs, protected bike lanes. I'm actually going to go through some of these one by one, so I'm not going to go through them all on this slide. But some of the common things that are easy to do as quick builds are curb extensions, where we can bump out the curb at a crossing and shorten the distance that a pedestrian has to cross. And these have been shown to significantly increase the number of vehicles that yield to pedestrians, because pedestrians are more visible when they are able to step out a little bit further from the where the curb originally was. Another strategy is reducing the radius of the curb, sometimes paired with a slow turn wedge, and that sharpens the corner and encourages cars to take a sharper turn, which also slows them down as they're turning. And a study in Toronto found that this has a significant impact on turning vehicle speeds as they're encountering pedestrian space. Bicycle through markings, so marking kind of the path of a bicycle lane through an intersection to distinguish where a bicycle should be and will be, and increases the visibility of that bicyclist, and also just organizes the space a little bit better and potentially encourages drivers to drive more slowly and increases the yielding behavior to bicyclists. This strategy is called a hardened center line. So this is actually a before and after, but taken from different angles. So here you just have a painted center line on the left, and on the right, there's actually kind of like a little speed hump installed with vertical bollards to make that more visible. And what that does is forces cars to take more of a right angle as they're turning left, which forces them to slow down as they're turning, and also just puts them in a better position to see pedestrians crossing and improves the visibility of those pedestrians. So those are the primary strategies that we're going to be talking about tonight. Just a note about how we got to these locations. We started with the tier 1 and tier 2 focus intersections and corridors from the plan, from the crash analysis we did previously. We were looking for the feasibility of the interventions, and part of that feasibility was whether or not it was an MDOT, I almost said IDOT, an MDOT road. And which is not to say that things cannot be done on MDOT roads, but we were looking for things that could be done very quickly. And so having another jurisdiction over the road just adds another layer and adds to the timeline. So we were also looking for locations where that location was not included in a recent, an ongoing, or an upcoming project, which I think is an encouraging thing to note, is that a lot of these locations were included in a recent, an ongoing, or an upcoming project. So a lot of locations are actually already being addressed. But there were plenty still for us to choose from. So out of the focus intersections, the intersections that we landed on for the 2022 interventions were Glen Fuller and South University and State. And then on the focus corridors, we are looking at Packard, part of Packard, a segment of Washington, North Maple, and a short segment of Ann Street. So I'm going to go through these one by one. Feel free to, as we're going through them, raise your hand or chime in and ask questions. We have identified these locations, but we are just now getting into the design portion of it. So nothing has been designed yet. These are ideas that we have based on our initial look at what the crashes are saying is happening and what we think is feasible and possible. And to Brett's question earlier about a budget, we still need to work out, how much these are going to cost and how much can be done in the city's budget this year. So some stuff we're still ironing out, and we're looking forward to hearing your feedback, and including, what your experiences are at these locations and any thoughts you have on things that could be improved at these locations.
And Stacey, if I may interject just one point, and I think you kind of touched on it, but I do want to underscore it. So what Stacey and the team are going to present now are kind of the initial quick build. This is not the entirety of all the work that's going to be done. There's going to be more stuff that comes out of this. But what we really challenged the consultant team to do is come up with a handful of projects that could be implemented almost immediately. And so we are looking at implementation of the projects you're about to hear about before June 30th of this year. And that is because council had given us budget to move forward with implementation. And so we want to show that we are, taking that seriously and moving forward with it. And then again, this is data-driven, focusing in on the high crash areas and locations. So, when you just see two intersections and a few small segments of roadway, that we're not going to pack up and say we're done at the end of that exercise. This is just kind of the immediate projects, and then we will work on some stuff that's in out years as well. So just wanted to frame it that way, just so folks understand. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Raymond. So looking at Washington Street, we are looking from Main to Fletcher. I'm not showing that whole corridor here. Based on what we saw in the crash patterns, the biggest concerns from a safety perspective are that there are a fair amount of crashes involving pedestrians relative to other locations in Ann Arbor. There were a couple of head-on left turn crashes. So when I'm talking about these primary safety concerns, I'm pulling out the types of crashes that are the greatest concern for safety. So the crashes that more often cause the severe crashes or are a safety concern because they involve vulnerable users, for instance, or just based on the pattern of what's going on. So speaking of which, on Washington, we just see a higher volume of crashes along this corridor than in many other corridors in Ann Arbor. So our strategy with the interventions that we're looking at, we're trying to increase the visibility of the pedestrians crossing, and we're trying to reduce turning speeds in particular. So what we're looking at are paint and post bump outs. So those are the curb extensions that I was referencing earlier. I'm mixing terminology here. And in some cases, we'll do paint and post bump outs with the hardened center line as well. So that will both slow left turning cars. At the same time, we're going to be reducing the distance for that pedestrian crossing. So this shows the breakdown of the types of crashes that we're seeing. This one is just pulling out Main Street. Just a second. Apologies for that. The joy of working in a pandemic. My mother-in-law has to go home. So that is Washington Street. Is any questions or reactions to Washington Street? Nate.
Yeah, just what does PDO stand for?
Oh, sorry, property damage only.
Thank you.
Yep.
And injury KABC, those are specific injuries.
Yes, I'm very sorry for the jargon. K stands for a fatality, A are serious injuries, B are less serious injuries, and C are very, very minor injuries, or a crash involving a person, but not more than property damage only, but not as high as a minor injury.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I thought I heard you say there was a lot of head-on crashes along here, but I'm not seeing that. I'm only seeing a lot of property damage.
Head-on left turn. You see this 4%.
Yeah.
And this graph is only showing one intersection.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the whole corridor. Okay, thank you.
And I mean, you still see when I say, it might not be that there are a lot. Those are the ones that are concerning, though. You're not going to see a lot of head-on left turning crashes really anywhere, but those really stick out, and those are way more severe than rear end crashes. So most places we are going to see, like the majority are rear end crashes, but those are often not the most concerning ones.
Okay.
All right, so along Packard, the safety concerns here are there's just a high volume of crashes, and we did have a preponderance of crashes involving bicyclists. So what we're looking to do here are just reduce speeds overall. and improve the comfort and the visibility of bicyclists. And we saw a really big opportunity here on Packard, where there is a striped bike lane already, but there are also really fairly wide lanes that could be reduced and give some of that space to provide a buffer and potentially a barrier between the bike lane and the travel lane. So what we're looking to do along Packard is add a buffer and add these quick curb, they're called, along the ground with these bollards that pop up and provide that physical barrier between the travel lane and the bike lane. So we could do this all the way up and along the stretch, or we could just do a couple different things. We could do the quick curb along the ground the whole way and just do the bollards at some key intersections or at all intersections to mark, hey, you're entering this corridor with a bike lane, and really elevate the visibility of that bike lane at key places. Julie?
Yeah, just a quick question. Is that a year-round treatment, or is that have to be taken down in the winter?
That's a darn good question. We recognize that we need to figure out a way for year-round deployments. Admittedly, we haven't entirely solved for that internally because we have to coordinate with other departments to do that. And so we've done some research in other communities in terms of how they manage some of these facility types in cold weather climates where there's snow plowing and winter maintenance needs. So stay tuned in this space, but it's definitely the intent for us to have year-round protection, and especially things that have a vertical element. If they don't hinder snow plowing and things like that, if we can figure out a way to work with that. But yeah, it's a very pertinent question, Julie. Thank you for raising it, and it's top of mind for us, rest assured.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question applies to the paint also to some degree. You know, I mean, the paint has to be visible, and so it depends on how the snow gets plowed and where it gets pushed to. If it gets pushed on top of the painted areas, then I don't know, maybe it's still serving the purpose, but.
Well, those bump outs are paired with bollards, so you would still have a vertical element
Okay,
along the edge, marking the edge of that space.
perfect. And that would be year round, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the goal. And I think we still need to work with the city on how to make that happen.
Is there any downside to having the bollards be continuous as opposed to just at the intersections?
Just costs, you know, we might find that it's worth it to spread that budget around. I think the biggest concern for bicyclists is at the intersections. So, you know, it's not so much that there's a downside, but how much of an upside is there? This might be the question.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add into that. Once you get past some intersections, we do have mid-block bus stops and other features where vehicles will need to approach a curb. And, you know, there's we have what's called a multimodal, many different types of travelers that use our public right of way. And that I think that we're intending to find that right compromise. And although, you know, looking at the image with bollards the whole length, whether it's cost, whether it's other conflicts with things like transit use or package delivery, these are all details that get worked out in the design consideration. So do appreciate that, and we'll look forward to your feedback as we move forward.
Yeah, I was just going to add to, you know, Stacey mentioned just, you know, needing to spread around the initial round of funding for the Quickbuild projects too. And, you know, of course, the extent of bollards and things like that is detail that we can start to look into as we get a handle on, you know, what the overall cost for these installations are going to be. The one other nice thing I'll mention about Quickbuild projects is you can add on to them over time too. So a project like this could start out focusing really around the intersections where, you know, the majority of the conflict points are. And then over time, they could be, improved with additional bollards. That's not dissimilar from, say, the William Street bikeway, where the initial installation used, paint and post, and that was just upgraded this year to have, a fixed curb along there, which better for maintenance and everything long term. But it's just an example of how a relatively quick build project can be enhanced over time too. So just something to keep in mind as we move forward.
Yeah, great point, Oliver. So another thing that we'll be looking at along Packard are opportunities that we might be able to tighten some curb radii at intersections and shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians. So we're looking to do a very similar treatment to Maple. Here, there are actually already buffered bike lanes, so it would just be adding that physical barrier. We also noted that there's quite an abrupt end to the bike lane at Dexter. And so we'll be focusing on that intersection in particular and how might we be able to improve the connection to the park and intersecting bike lanes through pavement markings. So Glen and Fuller, you'll notice this aerial is taken when Fuller / Depot is under construction. But I'm sure you guys can all picture this intersection in your heads. What we were seeing at this intersection were some crashes that involved bicyclists, some head-on left turn crashes as well, and some angled crashes. And so our strategy here is, again, pretty much everywhere we're going to reduce speeds, because reducing speeds is the #1 way to reduce crashes and crash severity. But we're especially focused on turning speeds at this intersection. And we're going to be focused on elevating the visibility of bicyclists. So some things that we're looking at here, reducing the curb radii if we can. It's kind of a weirdly angled intersection, so we might have some limitations there. But we are looking to add a hardened center line to try to straighten out the left turning movements, avoid crashes. Looking at striping out a painted median on this approach here, which wouldn't be a median for like a pedestrian refuge island. It would strictly be to just better organize the space and kind of break up the pavement, break up the sight line so that it feels narrower and encourages slower speeds. And then approaching the intersection and through the intersection, along this leg and this leg, we'd be looking at green through markings and possibly greenback sharrows along the Depot and Fuller leg to help bicyclists navigate this intersection and again, increase the visibility of the crossings of those bicyclists. Any questions or thoughts here? All right. So I didn't include these stats for each location, as you noticed, especially the corridors are a little bit harder to capture in a snapshot, but this is what we're seeing at Glen and Fuller. A lot of these single motor vehicle crashes did actually involve a bicyclist. So you see these 7 crashes involving bicyclists over that 5-year period. So South University and State. We know that this is an upcoming project, but this is one that we thought was worth focusing on in the short term, and in doing so, it might help inform that project and not kind of supersede it, but inform something that might become permanent. And as Oliver said, you know, one of the benefits of these quick build strategies, that the style of doing these quick builds, is that we can pretty easily change it. We can upgrade it, we can tweak it, modify it. And so it's an effective strategy to use it to test something that's more permanent. So I'm sure you guys are very familiar with what's going on at this intersection too, really high volumes of pedestrians. We did see some crashes involving bicyclists, and just the traffic patterns are complex given that there are turn lanes and some through lanes, so multiple lanes from each approach, but at an all-way stop, which tends to be confusing. You know, who gets the right of way along State Street if there's a car in both lanes, or one approached at a different time than the other. So what we're looking to do here is just simplify the intersection, remove the turn lanes, add some paint and post bump outs to simplify the traffic patterns at the same time that we're reducing the crossing distance. We did look at this in a quick traffic analysis using our Synchro software, and we think that this will be a big benefit to safety and not degrade traffic. Any thoughts or questions here? All right, so I don't think that we've mentioned it, but one of the specific council actions was to approve funding specifically for left turn traffic calming. So while most of these focus on the tier 1, tier 2 intersections and corridors, we also looked at where there are left turning crashes. And so this is one of those intersections where we found more left turn traffic crashes than other intersections throughout the city. So here in addition to the left turning crashes, there's a pretty high number of crashes overall, and we did see some crashes involving bicyclists. And you know, just observationally noted that there are pretty wide crossings that can be intimidating for both pedestrians and bicyclists. So our strategy here again is to reduce turning speeds and increase the visibility of bicyclists through the intersection. So we're looking at those through intersection markings, hardened center lines to slow down those left turns, installing pedestrian countdown signals, which will help pedestrians, but we have also seen, or research has shown, that those also reduce rear end crashes. So while I noted before, those aren't necessarily the biggest concern from a safety perspective, if we're seeing a lot of crashes, we still just want to reduce the number of crashes. And that's a good strategy that helps both pedestrians and also reduces those rear end crashes at the same time. So this is the breakdown of the crash types at Liberty and Stadium. And then we have a couple of locations along Ann. So Ann was one of the corridors that popped out as a high crash corridor. And we are looking at two adjacent intersections here at Main and 4th, where we're seeing crashes involving both pedestrians and bicyclists, and just a high number of crashes. So I'm starting to feel like I'm sounding like a broken record, but we want to reduce the exposure to pedestrians and increase the visibility of cyclists through these intersections by using the paint and post bump outs and the through intersection markings.
Do we have information on volumes, pedestrian volumes, cyclist volumes, car volumes, so that we can think about not just total crashes, but also crash rates?
We have that in some locations. I don't know that we have that comprehensively.
Yeah, that's correct. You know, it's really, you know, we have a lot of counts, but they're not all taken at the same time, right? So we have some intersections where the counts are maybe more recent than others, and then the data gets stale. And you know, we don't have real-time monitoring at all locations either. So it's always a bit of a mixed bag in terms of what the actual, you know, rate is, what that denominator would be. So yeah, it's when we have it, we use it, but we don't always have it.
It might be interesting to, even if the data are imperfect, for these corridors and intersections, to do what we can with crash rates, so we can identify what might actually be the more dangerous intersections.
Yeah, we can take a look at that. Excuse me. I think we also want to be focusing where we're seeing the most crashes happen at the same time, and so that we can reduce the incidence of crashes. But I'll kind of reiterate what Raymond was saying earlier. These are obviously not the long list of things that we'll be focused on. Will be, you know, part of our effort is to develop a 5-year action plan for the city and implementation program. So we're going to be looking at and setting the city up for, you know, a larger docket of projects. And so that's maybe something that we can factor into that analysis. So our next steps are, I see that we're right at 7 o'clock. Our next steps are to focus on building out these quick build projects, developing the designs and the cost estimates, and fine tuning them. We've also started our major streets traffic calming research, and we'll be kicking off engagement specifically around those quick builds in the next month or so. Any last questions from the committee before we move to public comment?
The reason why I was asking about the denominators is I think that we need to simultaneously consider where the most crashes are and where the most dangerous intersections and stretches are. If you have a dangerous intersection that pedestrians and cyclists avoid because it's dangerous, that also might be something that's deserving of treatment, even if we're not seeing a whole lot of crashes there.
Yes, that's a great point. And I suspect there are some intersections where that is the case.
Yeah, to the extent, and this is not a scientific response, but as a planner, I do feel that it's appropriate to point that during the planning process, we did substantial citizen engagement, and particularly for the vulnerable users, bicyclists, pedestrians, identified areas for all ages and abilities, bicycle improvements, as well as locations for new crosswalks. So Jonathan, I agree with you that those areas that people avoid, but it's hard to count what doesn't happen. But through the public engagement process, we have some considerations of areas that the community is looking for improvements that may not have showed up as a high crash location or a high crash rate. So that would be another area for us as a team to look at what we heard in the public engagement process. And through this committee as a public meeting and other outreach efforts, we'll continue to, as they used to say in the old days, keep our ears on, good buddy, to see if individuals have places that they do avoid. Feel free to either type it in the chat or send me an email after, and I'll make sure that the team considers that if you have a location in mind. But it's really that combination of data driven as well as our local knowledge that helps to inform the improvements that we select and make. And thank you for that thought. I really do appreciate it.
I see Julie has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask again about the timeline. So if I remember correctly, Oliver said that their group was going to be workshopping the quick builds and doing site walks in August, or sorry, April, is that right? And so will they be dealing with like plan designs and getting feedback on actual designs, or how does that relate to the timing of that relate to the timing of doing the designs?
Yeah, I think essentially, I mean, just given the timeline, kind of working backwards from, to get something in the ground by the end of the fiscal year, contractors really need to be out there in May, late April, getting going with that work, which really leaves, next month to get through that design work. I think there is the second Vision Zero committee meeting is, I think, scheduled in April too. So we got to kind of work out the choreography of which meeting is happening when and first. But we would certainly want to share those designs with you, with this group as that comes together, probably either through that meeting or as part of the workshops too. So.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think for a lot of these, we're talking about some pretty standard designs of, bump outs and safety measures that are common design tools. So we are, we want to be transparent and open with the community, but we're not expecting like a lot of changes through that process for these quick builds.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Yep. Anything else? All right. Eli, I'll move to public comment period then. Oops. Eli,
We do have one member who has expressed an interest in speaking, Mr. Peter Houck, and he has been on. I've just enabled him to speak. And at this point, Peter, again, thank you for attending this meeting this evening, and we look forward to any input that you have using other means, email, etc., about the content of the meeting. But I know that you brought your own issue item forward, so please try to limit your input to 3 minutes, and the materials that you've provided will be shared with the committee and the public through the summary of this meeting when it gets posted in a week or so. So just please be aware that we are taking the information and making it available as you requested. The floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Eli. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Hi, committee members. Thank you for taking on this effort. It's really important to the future of non-motorized transportation in Ann Arbor. I'm calling tonight with a specific concern and an opportunity that I think is good for this group. Scioto Church Road is going to be refurbished in 2022 at long last, and that work is going to include the addition of some important features like crosswalks and buffered bike lanes. Those are good steps in the right direction, and I'm very happy that my neighborhood is finally going to have these safety improvements. But with the current plan, when the work is complete, we are still going to have a very straight, very flat, very wide, and now very smooth roadway, interrupted only by paint lane markings. We're not going to get any permanent year-round features that would deter the most prevalent dangerous behavior that I encounter on Scioto Church, which is passing in the center lane. So impatient drivers very frequently pass other cars that are slowing to turn onto side streets or into driveways. I was involved in a near miss when another driver passed my car as I slowed for a pedestrian in the crosswalk at Greenview. I can only imagine the driver thought I was slowing to turn onto Greenview, and they passed me in the center lane while someone was using the crosswalk. So you can find a diagram of this event on page 4 of the presentation that that you'll receive from Eli, or that he may already have shared. But this is just one example. I see this passing behavior very frequently while driving, walking, and riding on Scioto Church. The moving together plan that we saw some of tonight details several design elements that could help, I think, could help deter this dangerous behavior by breaking up the vast expanse of uninterrupted pavement that is Scioto Church, like bump outs, refuge islands, hardened center lines. Unfortunately, the new design doesn't contain any of those things. So this then is the opportunity. Can we please find a way to implement some of these innovative features within this upcoming Scioto Church Road project? I'm very eager for them, and so are other people in my neighborhood. Last week, I started a Facebook group called Safe on Scioto Church. And in the last 10 days since I started it, 43 other people have joined. It's a public group, so you can check it out for yourself and see that many people who live around here want something that will stop the dangerous driving behavior on our main road. So this is I think a once in a generation redesign for this street, and it's our chance to get it right. And this new road is like a blank slate that we can use to demonstrate how effective these Vision Zero strategies can be for improving the safety of roadway users in neighborhoods like mine. So I would like you to please take a close look at it and consider it. Thank you.
Peter, thank you, and I appreciate you keeping your comments within the time allotted. I don't know if you've had the screen, if you could see that we have actually been sharing your slides as you were making your presentation.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Eli. Yeah, so slide 4 showed the shows a description of or a picture of what I was describing. So an impatient driver almost causing a serious accident with a person using that existing crosswalk at Greenview. So we're going to have a lot more crosswalks, and I'm really worried that this is a serious accident that we could have just based on how often I see this behavior. So thank you for sharing this.
Well, no, again, we appreciate you and your advocacy, and our interests are joined. We're looking for establishing a safer, not just safe, but safer or safest system. And we're going to take this under advisement and continue to work through it. So appreciate you taking the time to reach out. And again, I think we have a shared interest, and it's a question of what we're able to do in the short term, how well it works, and what improvements we might be able to add over time if necessary. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, all.
All right, we don't have any other citizens prepared to provide comments. So at this point, Madam Chair, I recommend that you close the public comment period.
You need a more coordinated chair. I hereby close the public comment period.
Well, I wanted you to have at least one official duty, given your willingness to accept the role and responsibility. Thank you. You did a wonderful job, and you're no better or worse than staff. I'm struggling with my mute button too.
Thank you.
Okay, members of the committee, a lot of information coming to you related to specific locations, related to the overall initial program that we're coming out with. Are any comments generally, or if not, I don't believe there's anything wrong with getting people back to their normal life a couple minutes early. But clearly, since we're all convening, if there's anybody has thoughts to share, this would be a good time. Larry Beck.
Yeah. From what I could see, the proposed Quickbuild projects look good. I just like to say hi to Carolyn Lush. She was, there was a project that we worked on. We were hoping to get her involved. There was a woman named Danielle Jacobs, and she had a group of people. And I know she was trying to get Carolyn on the project back a few years ago, working on a campus-to-campus bikeway, and the student group did great work. And I'm sure it would have been even better with Carolyn working on that project. And as I recall, Jonathan Levine was one of the advisors on that. But related to that project, right now the city and university are proposing to rebuild the East Medical Center Drive Bridge in a way that makes it worse for pedestrian and bicyclists there. And in fact, that bridge was a part of the link that both the student group and Washington Bicycling and Walking Coalition proposed. But they're proposing to narrow the west sidewalk on that bridge from 10 feet to 8 feet, heavily used by pedestrians and bicyclists. And if we get the campus-to-campus bikeway completed, it'll be much more heavily used. So, you know, we're talking about doing good things here with the Vision Zero program. At the same time, the city and university are trying to spend millions of dollars. I guess an $8 million project, but they don't want to spend another $500,000 to widen the sidewalks, especially the west sidewalk, to make it safer for pedestrian and bicyclists. So, you know, it's like one step forward, maybe 2 steps back here. I'm concerned about that kind of thing. We're hoping to change that decision, but I don't know if we're going to be successful. The city council is about evenly split on that issue. And right now, I guess the issue is there any way to find the money to make the non-motorized improvements there? But any thoughts about the problem with that kind of thing? I know the people on the Transportation Commission too have been concerned about this. They didn't like what the city and university were proposing, but they weren't able to change anything. And so far, there hasn't been any success in our changing things. But any thoughts about how to avoid this kind of backtrack?
Well, Larry, I guess I can only say that which is the obvious, that, you know, this is a subcommittee of the commission that you're, in many respects, the expression is preaching to the choir in speaking with this group. The issue is the overarching policy direction of the policy body, and that would include the council. And I think that the work that you and others are doing in bringing the community's interest forward for the policymakers to consider, as a technician, clearly safety and multiple mobility is of our interest, but that at the end of the day, it's the policy body that makes the decision. And our Transportation Commission staff have put forward issues. They've been taken into consideration, and that's as far as we're empowered as staff to go with this. But I like the steps forward as opposed to the steps back. And if we only have 2 steps back and we can move 6 steps forward, I think overall we might wind up in a +4 position by the end of 2022.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I have a question in response to Mr. Houck's excellent presentation. So the Quickbuild projects that we're talking about are kind of rough and ready retrofits of existing streets. Are the principles that are guiding the Quickbuild, are they also guiding redesigns, for example, of Scioto Church? Because it would be ironic if we're retrofitting existing streets but not incorporating the same principles in newly designed streets.
So, Jonathan, I appreciate that comment, and I'm going to start speaking, and I'm going to then turn it over to Cynthia Rettinger, one of our transportation engineers. And I use the title transportation engineer. When I started with the city in 2005, we had traffic engineers. And that's more than just a subtle nuance. And so that over the course of my tenure with the city, we have gone from begging and pleading for anything for active transportation to a place where it has been normalized, and that we don't any longer have traffic engineers, but we have an engineering staff that looks at all users for all improvements. So that's my way of complimenting our staff as it has grown over the past 15, 16 years. I believe that when you look at the improvements that have been made on most, if not all of our projects, you will find things like curb extensions, you will find buffered bike lanes, you will find narrowed lanes. And I, hats off, compliments to our transportation engineering team. And I believe that to the extent that they're aware of a project, they're chiming in with not their 2 cents worth, but a nickel's worth. And I'll use that as a way of turning it over to Cynthia, who can share with you the approach that she uses in working with our colleagues in the project engineering side that works on the actual capital projects in the resurfacing program. Cynthia?
Sure, Eli. So all of our capital programs have transportation engineers who are, assigned to them. So our capital projects, and in those designs, we are definitely incorporating these elements. And we have been for several years, even prior to this plan being completed. There are always competing needs in projects, and there are a lot of elements that go into consideration on every project, and every project is context sensitive. So we're looking at the context of the project in the user profiles that we are, looking to be incorporating, and what those improvements should look like. When it comes to bicycle infrastructure, previously we'd been looking at the non-motorized plan, and now we are looking at the current transportation plan as far as what level of design needs to go in, if it's an all ages route, what we can fit in. It also has, things can be limited by the type of project. Sometimes, it may, to a consumer, it might seem like it's a complete rebuild when it's not a complete rebuild. It may be a resurfacing project. And in that case, we're not really adjusting any curb lines or anything like that, but we're fitting in what we can within a particular project. And we're also utilizing our crosswalk design guidelines for when we're looking at crossing design. And in addition to those, we also cross-check them against the most recent recommendations and guidelines from FHWA and NACTO.
Thank you, Cynthia. All right. Other thoughts, questions, comments? If not, I think what I'll do is what we do here in the later, and I'm hoping the later stages of the pandemic with virtual meetings, we do the wave and then push the red button, as I recall. So thanks again. There's the wave goodbye, and I'm about to push the red button. I'll see you all next time. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Oops. Don't even know me.